Welcome into this episode of Vinyl Voyage. I'm Keegan Matheson. Today we are doing an artist showcase. We will be diving into the king of country music, Johnny Cash. And today's episode is dedicated to one Kenny Rogers. Rest in peace, the gambler. All right, so let's set sail on Johnny Cash's illustrious country music career. All right, so the first album I'll be we're going to actually be doing a countdown of sorts, 10 albums of his illustrious discography. It's pretty lengthy. I think he released over 50 records in his career, which is insane. That's an insane amount of records and a lot to go through and try to listen to all the music and determine what's the best. But I'm going to do my best and let's see how it goes. All right, so I do have an honorable mention. With that many records, you have to have at least one honorable mention. This is Ride This Train. And this is his first concept album, meaning that from start to finish, it tells a story. And basically, we're riding a train with Johnny Cash, meaning that before songs we hear, and it continues there throughout. And he does this kind of iconic monologuing, and then goes back to singing, and then monologuing, and then goes back to singing. And we'll see a lot of that through his discography. And this is the first album that he kind of did that with. What was this? Because it's a concept album and it all flows together as one cohesive piece. I'd say that's Ride This Train. And that came out in 1960, pretty early on in his career. So we're going to start. This is our 10th album of the countdown here, the fabulous Johnny Cash. It kind of speaks for itself there. In 1958, this album came out, and it has the hits of I Still Miss Someone, Don't Take Your Guns to Town, and Run Softly Blue River. This album, it's one of the main albums people think of. Before this album, Johnny Cash was kind of known as a singles artist. A lot of the more well-known I Walk the Lines, Folsom Prison Blues, a lot of that came out before this album, so he was trying to follow it up, and that's kind of hard songs to follow up, and most of those came out as 45 singles. When he basically was discharged from the Air Force, he came home, he was a mechanic, and that was his bands, was two mechanics and him, and they just got signed to Sun Records and took on from there. And this was one of the first albums he recorded, was the fabulous Johnny Cash, and it sits at number 10, 1958. All right, so number 9 is Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Ballads of the American Indian. I feel like Johnny Cash kind of had his finger on the pulse of America through his whole career. He knew exactly what was the political landscape of every year that he was creating records, and this came out in 1963. And it has songs like the Ballad of Ira Hayes, Custer, which is about General Custer, and As Long as the Grass Shall Grow. And that was the America's promise to the American Indians, that they could have this land and this reservation for themselves. And I feel like devoting a whole album to the native people of this land, is a pretty patriotic thing to do. I know that a lot of it came with war, and a lot of it, the settlement of America, came with a lot of heartache, and that's why why he called it Bitter Tears, and it's kind of a somber reminder of who came before us. Bitter Tears. And this one came out in 1964. All right, speaking of tears, we have Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And this is a pretty fun one. It's got the Legend of John Henry's Hammer. Everybody remembers that great little children's short about John Henry's Hammer. And I remember watching that as a kid, and that was really inspiring and awesome. This has got Busted on it, which is previously recorded by Ray Charles, and that was a big deal for a white artist to do a black artist song. I wish it wasn't a big deal for them to do that, but that's part of our history. And it also has Casey Jones on it, which is a pretty good ballad. But I love the cover here. It's Johnny Cash being the working man's man. You know, I feel like Bruce Springsteen tried to do this as well, as far as speaking for the people in the working class. And I feel like Johnny Cash, more than any other singer or artist of his time, he tried to speak to the everyman, and kind of filled the void that Bruce Springsteen would later actually go on to fill himself. All right, coming in at number 6, we have Orange Blossom Special. This one has a lot of hits on it. This one has, of course, Orange Blossom Special, which has that wonderful harmonica going, and it's pretty jamming, gotta say. And a lot of Bob Dylan songs, actually. He covered "It Ain't Me, Babe" and "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right," which those are fantastic songs. And also, of course, from the Carter family, "Wildwood Flower," which Johnny Cash would go on to marry a member of the Carter family, Jean Carter Cash. And this is a fun one, and it reminds us of the friendship that Johnny Cash and Bob Dylan had. And I think that was one of the coolest friendships in musical history. And just to think that those two hung out at some point, I think it's really cool to know that was a relationship that blossomed. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's a few pictures in here. And in one of the recording studios, we have Bob Dylan in there, which is pretty cool. And about this record, this is actually a 200-gram pressing, which is pretty awesome. Speaking of the vinyl and the vinyl Voyage, yeah, so it's thick. It's a thick boy. It's pretty nice, gotta say. It's also numbered, if we didn't want to make it more collectible than it already is. All right, so number 6, we have hymns. I think everybody grew up singing gospel songs, especially in the South here. And that's what Johnny Cash did when he lived in Arkansas. He would get his mother's hymn book, and he would sing songs, and those were the songs that he sung the most, were spiritual songs and ballads, and a lot of songs that you would know. I mean, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," and "Lead Me Gently Home," and "It Was Jesus," "Lead Me Father." I mean, all these things that you probably grew up in church and singing these in everyday Sunday service stuff. But this album just, I feel like Johnny Cash is at his most personable when he's speaking about God, because it was so ingrained in him as a child, and that's how he connected with his mother. And her hymn book was basically his window into music itself. So I feel like we get Johnny Cash at his best when he's speaking about Jesus or his God. So hymns. All right, coming in on the final 5 here, we have Johnny Cash America, a 200-year salute and story and song. This one's a fun one because it's also a lot like the Ride This Train in that same vein, as far as he goes into speeches. So basically he monologues a little bit, and then he goes into a song, like seamlessly. But this is all a concept record, because it all flows from one song to the next song to the next song, and it all has a consistent meaning. And this actually tells the story of America. As you can see in the inside here, it kind of looks like the Declaration of Independence. And it's cool because we have songs about Paul Revere, and then the Remember the Alamo, the Gettysburg Address, and of course the one to round it all out is "These Are My People," which is just a call to all of Americans that you're his people, you're Johnny Cash's people, and that he knows that America can do well when everybody's working together. And I feel like unity is something that he wanted to strive for. And at this time, I think I'll have to help me out, because I wasn't alive at this time, but I think it was Nixon was president. Yeah, Nixon was president. And I mean, times were tumultuous, and when your president's about to get impeached, and we've had a little bit of that recently, a little bit of drama. It brings into perspective just all what came before, and how important it is to keep it going, even though it looks kind of bleak. And the Johnny Cash America, pretty cool. I feel like Johnny Cash, I know I said it was his best when he's singing hymns, but I think also in a live setting, he really, really hit home, because 2 of the top 5 records here are live records, and this is live at San Quentin. Johnny did some time for drug use and trying to get drugs into a different country through his guitar, which is infamously shown in "I Walk the Line" with Joaquin Phoenix, and that's the outlaw kind of persona that people like to remember about Johnny. But he wasn't really that outlaw. He was a man of faith and pretty had his head on straight most of the time. But he went when he had his relapse and he went back to drugs. He came back to Columbia Records. He wasn't having as much success recently, and he said, I want to record albums for prisoners. This is his second of the albums for prisoners, and he does a great job of talking and speaking to prisoners on their level. Like Wanted Man, of course, is about a wanted man, and Starkville City Jail is about serving time in a jail. And San Quentin, of course, is about San Quentin, which is a notable song. And my favorite song on this one is, because it's the first song. Anyway, so Wanted Man is a Bob Dylan cover. And he covers this one on this album, and that's just a fantastic song. That guitar lick is insane. I love it. Anyway, so Johnny Cash live at San Quentin, top 4 album. There we go. And number 3 is the one everybody recognizes him for. It's Johnny Cash and his hot and blue guitar. Yeah, with his hot and blue guitar. This is my first record store day purchase. This is pretty cool. So this is a blue pressing of this album. Nice little blue color there with the hot and blue guitar. So that's pretty fitting, I would have to say. But this has all the songs you know from him. It has "I Walk the Line." It has "Folsom Prison Blues." It's got "Cry, Cry, Cry," which was his first radio hit. So this is the one everybody pretty much knows him for. They just don't know that they know this album for. People say that Johnny Cash wasn't really an album person. He was more of a singles person. And if you'd have to say that, then this album is your favorite album because it's got all the good singles on it. And I basically went through all the best songs on that album. So let's see. Second, I'm gonna cheat a little bit. All right. So at the tail end of his life, Johnny Cash was not known and not held in great esteem. He was kind of having an ailing music career, and Rick Rubin, the music producer, who had previously worked with LL Cool J and Slayer and people like that, you wouldn't think would work with one like Johnny Cash. But that marriage turned out to be just what, America needed. This is America recordings. And I think that makes some of his best and most honest material, because when you're at the tail end of your life, the hindsight's 20/20. You see all the things that you couldn't see before, and I feel like this encapsulates all the knowledge of being on the road for, well, we saw that the first album he ever released came out in 1957, so that was almost 50 years of being on the road. That has to be draining and hard, and a lot of stories to tell. And I feel like he tells them the best in this American Recordings album. And these were as I said, years of his life where he was about to pass away. All these albums came out from 1994 to 2010. I kind of put them all together because they were made to go together, and that's why hence the box set, of course. And this is a nice. I think it's 7 LP set. It's very nice, and I think the best album of the bunch, though, if I had to only pick one of the albums here, is this one, which is A Man Comes Around. Pretty great album. Has all the songs that you think of when he's in this year's. It's got Hurt on it, and The Man Comes Around. Best use of a song in the movie Logan. They finish out the movie with The Man That Comes Around, and I think that encapsulates Logan's and Wolverine's story pretty good. It also encapsulates Johnny Cash's story pretty good. And the Hurt, which is a cover by 9 Inch Nails, which people wouldn't think that a country singer would be covering 9 Inch Nails, but that song is eerie when you listen to it, because you know that he was about to pass away, and to say that he was hurt and that he was not in the best place is kind of heartbreaking. But also, he seemed to be pretty happy with the way things turned out, and I think that kind of shines through the American recordings, and just an illustrious career that could be topped off with nothing better than Rick Rubin and Johnny Cash on the American recordings. So that's number 2 on my list. All right. So let's finish it off here. All right. So this is Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison at number 1. Best album that I think Johnny Cash released is, of course, a live album. This is pretty amazing. As I said before, he had relapsed on drugs, and he had to deal with that, and he wanted to speak to people that he thought were his peers. So he wanted to go to the jails and prisons and talk to people and sing to them about his hardships, and that this is just a moment in time and that there's hope for you. And I believe that this album is probably one of the best albums of all time. I'll probably put it in my top 10 of all time by any artist. It's Folsom Prison, of course, and Cocaine Blues is probably my favorite song in here, just because it's so energetic and so fun. And Greystone Chapel, which is actually a song that was written by one of the prisoners, and Johnny sang it the night before, and he sang it at the show, and it's a beautiful song. It really is. It's a nice spiritual. And I feel like this album really shows the legacy of Johnny Cash, unlike any other album of a certain artist. I feel like this is the one everybody recognizes and knows. And it doesn't even have I Walk the Line on it, which is pretty funny. But this live album, one of the best live albums of all time, and number 1 on my Johnny Cash albums of all time. Well, thank you guys for joining me on this episode of The Vinyl Voyage. I am your host, Keegan Matheson, and this is me signing off.